In 2024, a striking figure appeared in U.S. economic data. Mississippi's GDP per capita reached nearly $53,000, placing the nation's poorest state within range of Europe's major economies: Germany, Italy, France, and the UK. Across the Atlantic, Italy reported a nominal GDP per capita of roughly $40,226, according to IMF estimates. On paper, this creates an unexpected overlap, a state long associated with persistent poverty standing shoulder to shoulder with a G7 nation. These numbers raise deeper questions. Mississippi consistently records one of the highest poverty rates in the United States, while Italy maintains one of Europe's largest industrial sectors and a population nearly 20 times larger. One figure suggests convergence. Nearly every other indicator suggests distance. What kind of economic story produces a statistic like this, and what does that number really reveal? In recent years, a debate has taken off online. Claims that Mississippi is richer than entire European countries because of its GDP per capita. Charts circulating on economic forums often place Mississippi above nations like Italy, creating a comparison that spreads quickly because of how simple and shocking it looks. But GDP per capita is only one dimension of economic output. Economists often pair it with purchasing power parity, PPP, which adjusts for cost of living and local price levels. This video is not about choosing winners between Mississippi and Italy. It's about understanding how these metrics work, why they diverge, and what they actually measure. GDP per capita is calculated by dividing total economic output by population, providing a quick estimate of average productivity and income. Its strengths lie in its clarity and its usefulness for tracking changes over time, but it has major blind spots. It ignores cost of living, distribution of income, and the lived reality of residents. A high GDP per capita may simply reflect a small population or external capital flows, not actual well-being. Mississippi's latest figures show a total GDP of roughly $158 billion spread across fewer than 3 million people, while Italy, with a total GDP economy exceeding $2.3 trillion on nearly 60 million people. On the surface, the math alone makes Mississippi appear richer, but raw ratios overlook scale, structure, and economic depth. Italy's economy spans advanced manufacturing, global exports, agriculture, finance, transport, and tourism. Mississippi's output comes from a smaller, more limited base. So, does a higher per-person figure mean Mississippi truly outperforms a G7 nation? That conclusion requires more than simple division. Even if Mississippi's per capita output appears high, major structural distortions lie underneath. First, the currency mismatch. Mississippi's economy is measured in dollars, while Italy's is measured in euros. Exchange rate movements alone can raise or shrink Italy's GDP per capita in dollar terms without any real change for Italians. Second, comparing a single U.S. state to an entire sovereign nation magnifies differences in population size, industrial diversity, and fiscal autonomy. And third, a substantial share of Mississippi's income comes from federal transfers, 25.8% of total income in 2022, including Social Security and Medicare, supporting consumption, but not necessarily reflecting local production. This is where purchasing power parity steps in. While GDP per capita measures output, PPP answers a different question. How much can people actually buy with that income? It corrects for price differences between places. A simple way to understand it is this. PPP is the economic version of adjusting everyone's income to the same grocery store. Mississippi's regional price parity is 87.3% of the U.S. average, meaning goods are significantly cheaper there. For example, if you give two people $50, one in Jackson, Mississippi, and one in Rome. In Mississippi, that might cover dinner, groceries, and gas. In Rome, it may barely cover lunch and gas. That difference is what PPP reveals. And once GDP is adjusted for purchasing power, Italy's GDP per capita rises to around $56,000, placing it far above Mississippi in real living standards. And cost of living is only one part of how people experience an economy. To see the full picture, we have to step outside spreadsheets and into the daily realities of healthcare, infrastructure, and access. In 2022, residents of Mississippi averaged about $8,135 per person in healthcare consumption, while personal healthcare spending reached $9,394 per capita in 2020. Italy, meanwhile, spent roughly $2,700 per person in 2019. But spending doesn't translate directly to outcomes. Italy maintains universal healthcare, longer life expectancy, and far lower rates of chronic illness. Mississippi faces rural hospital closures, some of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country, and significant gaps in access to care. Transport tells a similar story. Italy supports a nationwide network of metros, buses, high-speed trains, and regional routes, with average monthly transport costs around €289 for car owners and between €35 to €80 for public transport. Mississippi's public transport is fragmented, often unavailable outside urban centers, making cars a necessity and raising the real cost of mobility. GDP per capita cannot capture these lived experiences. Much of the public confusion comes from how economic numbers are presented. Organizations like the IMF and World Bank publish GDP per capita as a headline figure, and media outlets often repeat it without context. Academic studies in economic literacy show that people naturally default to simple, one-number comparisons. A higher GDP per capita becomes a quick, intuitive, but often misleading shortcut for judging prosperity. Institutions like the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity have repeatedly pointed out that GDP growth does not automatically translate into improvements in everyday well-being. GDP per capita still plays an important role. It's valuable for tracking productivity over time, comparing long-term economic performance, and observing structural shifts within an economy. But its limits are clear. It cannot tell us which society is materially better off because it excludes health outcomes, life expectancy, inequality, and household consumption, which are core aspects of living standards. Mississippi's high GDP per capita reflects part of the American economic system and prosperity, but it doesn't define the well-being of its residents. When all indicators are considered together, Mississippi is not richer than Italy or any of Europe's major economies. Italy maintains a larger industrial base, higher national wealth per adult, longer life expectancy, and broader public infrastructure. While Mississippi records some of the lowest health and income metrics in the U.S., GDP per capita reflects output, not the depth of an economy, not the resilience of its institutions, and not the quality of life it produces. So the real lesson is simple. Never rely on a single statistic to define prosperity. Look beyond GDP to understand how people actually live. Economics isn't about who looks richer on a spreadsheet. It's about who thrives when the spreadsheet closes. Have you seen wild GDP per capita claims online? Drop them in the comments. And if you enjoy myth-busting economic stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until the next one, peace.